We're joined this week by Tony and James Pinto, the father and son team, who are currently working on the feature-length documentary Why Dinosaurs, which is a subject near and dear to our hearts, all about dinosaur enthusiasts and experts. Thank you both for coming on our show today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having us.
So you two started this project when James was in high school, graduating this year. Congratulations. And Tony, you own and operate a video production company. How do you describe is this a last hurrah before James goes off to college?
I'd say that's probably, for me, the best way to put it. Yeah, I was seeing the clock tick down, and, you know, we've spent some quality time together, but I was starting to feel like, you know, the end is near. And his older brother had already left the house, and it's like, okay, life's about to change.
I mean, I don't think we had that grand of intentions in mind when we started anyway. It was, you know, this is like I'm 15 or something, and he's
32.
Yeah, 29. And we just decided, hey, wouldn't it be fun to make, like, you know, a little sort of 20-minute, or I was like, my dream was like 40 minutes of, you know, just a thing on the history of paleontology and all the different books and movies over the years, sort of like a timeline. From there, I think it was just like sort of surprising how many people even wanted to be a part of it. And then, you know, now it's gotten to this point where we have the means, really. We just need to sort of get the editing stuff all together, but we have the means footage-wise to produce like a feature-length documentary just about all of this different, you know, engagement.
And we do have a plan. I mean, this is basically the storyboard. It's too long, you know, we've kind of charted it out. It's like 4 hours, and some people have said, oh, you should do a series, because everything nowadays is a series. But there's something kind of elegant, we feel, about it being just a film and being, you know, around 90 minutes. And it really forces you to distill all this stuff down and just give the best bits. Because we know dinosaur nerds would watch all 4 hours, you know. I mean, we have 25 hours of usable footage, which we're going to publish for people to consume. But, you know, we want to get it out to, you know, a bigger audience, you know, kids who are into dinosaurs, and even people who aren't necessarily, they don't think they're into dinosaurs, but maybe there's like this little, you know, long lost love or something, and we want to just nurture that out again. But, you know, it's a project.
Yeah.
Nice.
How did you, when you were first starting out, like, how did you first get the word out and start getting your first few interviews?
There was a point in like 8th grade in middle school where I wanted to do a science fair project involving something in paleontology, and that was about as far as I'd gotten thought-wise. But it was relatively hard to do because most science fair projects revolve around a sort of scientific method, like experiment, quote-unquote, whereas a lot of paleontology is sort of gathering and assessing data. Like, experiments happen from time to time, but most of it is just, here is this table that we have assembled of all of the numbers, and from here we're going to speculate upon what implication this has, you know, for whatever topic it is. And so I ended up finding out about this project in a book that I had been reading, where they took some Spinosaur teeth and evaluated the geochemical ratios of oxygen isotopes in them. And I was like, that seems like an interesting idea. You know, I want to try that. And so I ended up just like Googling my way through all of these chemical names and devices and things that they use, and just trying to get any script of idea, like how do I do this? You know, what is temperature ratio mass spectrometry? You know, or how they put it. And so I eventually just started like finding these websites where they were like, oh, okay, this school has a mass spectrometer in their lab. And I was like, okay, that's the thing I want. Let me just email them. And this went for, I think like 5 or so schools just in California. I was just trying to see, who would respond and what, and people are responsive with this. That's what's always, from the beginning surprised me, is just that, all of these professors and all these schools, and it wasn't a yes, but it was something, and just that, in itself is really sort of, it was inspiring to me, at least, that people were willing to reach out. And
Well, it was
humor.
eventually
Yes. Yeah. I eventually found some very nice geochemists over at the University of California, Santa Cruz, who said, yeah, we'll do it. Bring the stuff up and we'll do it and send it back to you. And I was like, that's cool, but I kind of want to like go through the process. So, I mean, Dad, we go up to Santa Cruz. And so we went up there and we did the chemicals. And ironically, while I was learning about it, I think the more I learned about it, the more almost, not disappointing, but just more complicated it got, in terms of just that, like, that is a relatively new science. And the climatology stuff being done with it is amazing. Like, they were doing some work on plankton that were being used to trace an 8 million year old El Nino event that was, something they could reference to future weather events that might happen, to see like what the pathway is. And in that sort of field where you have like a mountain of data and stuff like that, you can get a bit of this weather trend stuff going. But when it comes to trying to figure out what individual organisms are doing, it's really messy, because like sediments change things, the temperature of the water changes things heavily. There's an equation to like account for that, but it only goes on a base of having known what the temperature was 100 million years ago, which comes with a bit of speculation. So the results that I actually got from the project were by no means, clean, but it was interesting to see. It was essentially just that it was very variable in the amount of like salt in the water. The salinity of the water wasn't amount of salt even, it was just proximity to the ocean, like amount of times it had been picked up and rained.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, didn't even think about that.
Well, it's one of the few things you can actually even diagnose, because it's based on, oxygen has 2 common isotopes. Oxygen-16 is by far the most common, and oxygen-18 is sort of the second most common. And 18 is heavier because it's got more neutrons in it. And so if you go to an ocean, there's like a standard mean level of oxygen-18 to oxygen-16 that's like a 0 level sort of ratio. But once you evaporate any of that, more of the 16 is going to come up than the 18. So you have, the more times a source of water gets evaporated and rained onto a new area, like a river or something, the more times it's going to be lessened in oxygen-18. So you can actually sort of trace, with a very hazy degree of accuracy, where in the sort of water system the animal was spending its time, and it had been, in that case, the teeth were very variable. They were pretty all over the place. So, it's possible that there was different levels of brackishness or proximity to oceans or things. None of it was to the point where it would straight up be marine. But it was, sort of interesting to see, like, oh, okay, well, this was really weird. The sample size wasn't big enough to have any huge implications, and it, has like 18,000 variables that I have, not much means to wrap my 13-year-old brain around. But just getting into that process showed me sort of how open to projects these people are, and sort of how approachable they are. So to go all the way back and answer the original question, it was just cold emails, to people I saw in documentaries and stuff. And it was just, hey, I'm 15 at that point, and I'm making a documentary, and do you want to be part of it? You have time or something? We could go there. We'll just interview you, and that'd be cool. And then eventually, what started happening was we didn't really have the means to just fly out to all of these places, but he has all of these travel gigs, and so we would go I had started helping him out, just sort of schlepping gear and holding cameras and that sort of thing. And it would be like, oh, okay, let's go to Arizona. And I'd be like, oh, well, there's a natural history museum in Arizona. And just think, weird things would start lining up. It'd be like, oh, that natural history museum is where his childhood friend lives. Let's stay at their house, and then we can try and ask their director if they're into an interview. And we do that, and the director's like, yeah, sure, come on down to the lab. We'll figure something out. It's like, what? Once we got far enough, we're like really celebrities for me. People like Scott Sampson, Phil Curry, and Jack Horner, and James Kirkland. These sort of like paleo giants are just like open to this stuff. It's and the fact that we were able to really get it off the ground is just, it's always a little surprising to me, just because it goes against sort of what the mindset might be from the beginning of just like, these guys must be just busier than busy. There's no way, that you could figure something out. But, every time it's just a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah, we found that too on the podcast side. It's a really friendly community, paleontologists.
We're all just a bunch of dino nerds who want to talk about dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. If you come in asking, hey, do you want to talk about your favorite thing in the world? It's like, it's a fairly enticing offer.
I don't know. They're so nice. And then it's like as a bonus, if you're Canadian and a paleontologist or a dinosaur nerd, you're just like the nicest person on the planet, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a dad, seeing what started sort of at 13 with this science fair project, and
which you won, right?
He did.
Well, it got as far as the state. So it went county. We did Ventura County, which is where we live, and in its category, which was Earth and Environmental Sciences. Got first in that. Then you get to go to the state fair, which was really fun. We got to go to the California Science Center, which is right next to LA's Natural History Museum. I think one of the days I just ditched the Science Center and went to look at the dinosaurs at the LA Museum. Because it's got the dinosaurs in it.
Yeah,
right.
But
But,
series of
Kinda had
T-Rex,
to,
you can't beat it.
Yeah, there's all sorts of fun stuff in that dino hall. And it was new at that point, too. It had only been in for a couple of years. So I'd only been to it 5 times. It won first in its category there, and then from that point, they sort of throw you into this national science fair level competition sponsored by this big company called Broadcom. Yeah. And I got into the top 300 at that. And then that was the point where it stopped. It was semi-finalist, and then
you could tell they don't give the big prize money to the dinosaur exhibits.
Yeah, they want robots or something.
Yeah, you want a robot or something
cancer diagnosing apps. I mean, there's some really, really impressive stuff at the national.
The high
level.
impact stuff.
Wow.
But yeah, seeing this young kid with an understanding and a passion for that, of course, as a parent, you're going to go for that, whether that's, karate or soccer or dance or whatever it is, he's into dinosaurs. So it's all right, let's do it.
That's great.
Yeah. And James, you've also worked at, was it Brea Tar Pits and the Natural History Museum of LA?
Well, I've worked at Brea Tar Pits. I almost got to get in with LA's Natural History Museum, but a combination of age restrictions and bad timing with a certain pandemic sort of nipped that as it was about to happen. But in the case of La Brea, I've been there almost, it was getting close to 2 years. It was probably about a year and a half. And the first bit of that was spent sort of docenting, acting as one of those special cart people, where you walk up and they have a thing and they show you. And that's just interesting in the level of getting to see how people engage with any of this stuff, especially since it's not a dinosaur. So there's that one extra level of okay, I'm here and this is a museum with skeletons in it, but they aren't dinosaurs. So
Right.
there's there's a new thing for me to imagine, sort of. And with La Brea even, it's it isn't the classic. It's the classic Ice Age fauna, but it isn't the classic Ice Age world. It's sort of essentially a Montana pasture or something, or like a forest, where it's colder a bit, but like there's no giant glaciers or anything like that, and even in the winter, it's like there wasn't probably a whole bunch of snow, which is sort of ironic, just because there wasn't as much water, since a lot of it was in the glaciers in Canada. So the environment there is pretty strange, and sort of getting people through that journey of like, oh, okay, well, what is this? It's a sloth, but it's 8 feet tall, but it's a gorilla, but it's a bear, but it's an herbivore, but it's not as slow as a sloth, but it's still pretty slow. But it's like
It's a dinosaur. It's a dinosaur.
Move along. It's a dinosaur. But at that point, from there, I eventually got a spot in the lab, in the prep lab that they have. They call it the fishbowl, because the whole thing is this like semicircle of glass, and everyone looks in and bunk bunk bunk, like you're the exhibit. There was a non-zero number of people who asked, are the people in the lab animatronic?
Wow.
That has been a question.
Wow. Whoa.
Well, I think we're just busy. But I went through there and got to learn their process, which is very unconventional in paleontology as well, because you're working through asphalt, which is not a common sediment, and then beyond that, within that asphalt, you're working through these non-permineralized fossils that are just basically dark bones. Like, they're just sort of dark asphalt-filled bones, to the point where, like, you can see some really weird things. Like, I was working on a bison vertebra one time, and going through it, and there's sort of these bigger chunks of matrix, and in one of them, there was a leaf, that was in that same sort of jumble, like, of age. And the leaf, like, bent like a leaf and, like, returned back into its original shape. I'm just like, what the heck? This is a 30,000-year-old leaf, and I'm just thinking I'm picking it up going twang. And after that, I'm like, protect the hallowed leaf, But at that point, just seeing some of that stuff is weird. Beetles come out of that place all the time, too, and some of them even retain a bit of their color. Like, you'll see these green beetles, and they'll still have just a little bit of that iridescence, and you're like, whoa.
Wow.
Do you ever get birds?
We do get birds. We get some very, very finely preserved birds, which is very cool to see. I worked on the bone's called a tarsometatarsus once, that was a little thinner than a toothpick, and about an inch long or so. And so you won't the most common thing by far is raptors, because they're easiest to preserve, and there's a weird sort of edge case in the form of owls, which will, because it's at night and because they are sort of these pounce-on hunters, like, essentially they'll just slam themselves into the tar pits, trying to get a stuck mouse or something, and then they'll just go in right along with them. So one of the most common birds we find are owls. The big birds that you find there are the teratorns, these just giant it's almost like a condor-eagle hybrid, because it has a lot of similarities to condors, but there was recently a study that was sort of showing, like, it was similar in appearance, but it didn't have that scavenging capability. It wouldn't have been as good of a scavenger based on its beak and stuff, so it probably would have been sort of stalking around and catching smaller prey and swallowing it whole. Mm-hmm. Which is weird to imagine for a bird that has like almost a 12-foot wingspan.
Yeah.
You find, all sorts of birds. You find passerine birds, little sparrows and things.
Did you ever tell people when they're like, are there any dinosaurs? You'd be like, yes, look over here. We have
that was a running
dinosaurs.
gag, because there's this section where you can see all of the birds, and you're like, here we are, my favorite dinosaur, the Brea turkey vulture, majestic beast of the Pleistocene.
Probably raise some eyebrows when you say the word raptor, right?
Well, to a degree, but it's enough sort of in the lexicon, I think. You see a raptor, a bird of prey.
By the time La Brea was forming, were there still the terror birds in air quotes, or had those already been wiped out by all the North American stuff?
That was post, the name for it's the Great American Interchange, and that happened around 3 million, somewhere between 5 and 3 million years ago. So yes, the cats had already won, and that fight had been fought. There were a couple of interesting sort of artifacts from that, like the ground sloths being up there. We don't have Megatherium or anything like that, but we have some 8-9 foot tall sloths. The American lion was in a weird place for a while because there was a time when it was like people were all like, "This isn't a lion, it's a jaguar," and then there was recently actually a DNA study that was able to be done just because it's not from La Brea, but there is occasional genetic material of that species. And it was like, oh, you know what? Actually, this is closely related to a lion. Get all those signs with the spots out of here. Let's, take this back to where it was. So, yeah, that whole history really it's a fascinating place. I mean,
So once you started working at La Brea Tar Pits, is that you decided like, all right, now it's time for some non-avian dinosaurs, and you started going fossil hunting in other states?
It's funny because some of that was even before. When I was like summer of like when I was 14, I had just gotten this like sudden desire. I was like, I want to go and look for something, dig for something, and so I just started Googling around and showed my dad a couple of these websites, and he was like, yeah, sure. I mean, if you can figure something out. I was like, okay,
So you went together?
We went together the first year.
14. I'm going to send him off to South Dakota by himself,
That's true. That's true. Good point.
Yeah.
And so most of what I did for the first sort of couple of years there was really more of just prospecting. They would go to these ranch areas and send everybody off, and you'd go and look for little bits, and then when they found something big or something that's sort of like important, they would get it excavated, and then they would donate it usually to the Field Museum up in Chicago, because it's just a little private organization that goes and sends people out. But whenever they had something that was sort of value, because they came from a science background, it's sort of like this understanding of like, oh, okay, that should go somewhere where it can be studied, and we need to get all the data of it and all that. It's interesting to see. They do all these maps and things of the little, the sites and stuff for any of those bigger or articulated animals, and just to see like the precision involved in that is crazy.
So did you continue going out every summer, fossil hunting?
Yeah, and I actually just started doing this. We had the chance to go over to a place called the Wyoming Dinosaur Center for a couple days. They have a couple of quarries established of Morrison Formation material. So, Jurassic stuff, Allosaurus, Diplodocus, Camarasaurus, some of those sort of usual favorites. And you get to go out there and just sort of pick a direction in this hill. That's usually, most of the beds they have are some, 20 feet by 20 feet. They have one that's a fair bit bigger, but, you can sit and dig out at some piece of a sauropod or something like that. And then after that, you can take it, and they have this little museum that's like right at the base of the hill. They have a prep lab in there, and you can just, go right to the next stage of like, okay, well, here's some fossils that people have been finding. Let's prepare them, and then we can put them in the collections hall. And
Nice.
So it's really a nice sort of like bite-sized version of the complete experience. Like you can go there for a day, you can go there for a week, you can go there, there's a couple of interns that are there for like the summer. And so however much you sort of want to dive into that side of it, you can. And it does, give that really interesting sort of feeling of like getting to work in that space. It's the ultimate trial run for do you want to be a paleontologist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, having been out in the field, like middle of nowhere, Wyoming, Montana, South Dakota, these are some brutal conditions during the summer between the bugs and the heat and all that stuff. Wyoming Dinosaur Center, I sort of jokingly call it like the glamping of field work, because they've got a shade. They've got a porta potty, on a lot of the dig sites. It's around the corner from the air-conditioned lab. And so I thought, man, I wish I'd found that, when you were 14. Like, that's a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a little more hardcore to go out into just the open lands.
Yeah, but it's
Right.
cool to have that experience. And, we were talking to other paleontologists and future paleontologists, and not everybody's a huge fan of doing the field work, because some of them say, oh, there's plenty of stuff already, we could just work that, or they're not really that outdoorsy. But it's rough in the field, and
Yeah, it really is. I mean, going through that sort of just physical experience is like it's definitely something to separate out, because I think the stuff that really does sort of get me like I want to do this forever is the preparing stuff and the researching stuff and just talking about it and getting all fired up about it. Field work is fun, but it's something where it's really does like physically just take it out of you, for after a certain extent.
So now that you've done both sides of it, you prefer the preparation a little bit to the field work?
In most cases. I mean, there's something special about just going and seeing something that's like, you are person number one to have ever seen this thing, and like no disclaimer, no, oh, well, technically, it's like, that is it. You went out into the middle of nowhere and picked up this like piece of a gigantic creature from 70 million years ago.
Yeah. They put me, usually when I would go out in the summers with him, I'd be filming or I'd be back at the hotel working. I didn't do any of the digging. And so at the Wyoming Dinosaur Center, they were like, well, here, why don't you try it? And so I'm just chipping away at some rocks and finding some dark stuff. I have no idea what I'm really looking for. And it's like plant matter, but what's this, James? Nothing, And then all of a sudden I'm like, guys, this looks kind of interesting, like a bigger branch. And they're like, okay, and I'm like, oh, it's moving a little. Maybe you should stabilize it. And they're like, okay. And then I take out this chunk and I'm like, are those serrations? And both James and Mags, this intern, look and go, that's an allosaurus tooth. That's a big one too. And I was like, oh, cool. Like beginner's luck, I guess.
Well, ironically, I don't even know if you were the first one to see the serrations.
Maybe not.
It might have been like, hey, can you look at this? And it was like, whoa. Because the best tip we had was that it was like dark and shiny, which is a usual sort of, in that formation at least, it's an indicator of enamel. But beyond that, to see like the little tip of it and just be like,
So then they took that immediately into the lab and cleaned it up. And by the end of the day, we're looking at, a tooth in pretty good shape, good enough to have all the scientific data that they would want,
Nice.
for that tooth. And they have 200 others, but, even that is part of, a bigger data set. So it's really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Did you get to do the whole like numbering the fossil collection and like pointing out where it is with all the technology and all that kind of stuff?
We got to sort of look at sort of the whole writing process of like, okay, here's a fossil. We're going to give it a little map location. We're going to, measure sort of what angle it's at. And then we're going to take it out, and then we're going to write it in this database.
And they put your name on there too. So that tooth
nice.
has my name on it.
We got to wave it off
Awesome.
into the halls.
You're a true dinosaur enthusiast now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
That's definitely,
tooth.
one way to get into it.
So going back to the documentary, what are some of the most memorable moments so far while making this?
Well, we've had quite a few.
Yeah.
Almost the harder part is just picking some.
The curry story is a pretty good one.
The curry story is pretty fun. So we had been doing some interviews in Alberta, and we went to the Tyrrell, and just had a great time with all the people there. And after that, it was like, okay, well now we're going to go up to the University of Alberta and interview Phil Curry, who's teaching there right now. And so it was like, okay, let's go up, and then we end up going in this building on like the 4th floor or something and meet him in what is essentially his office. And he's like, oh yeah, this is a cool area, but I think the most of the the fossils and things you'd actually want to see are on the first floor, because if we put them on the fourth floor and there was an earthquake, then the whole building would sort of sandwich the lower floors. That's why I made the Tyrrell with only one floor. It was like, yeah, that's a good point.
They got a lot of land out there too.
Yeah, they have a lot of horizontal space over in Drumheller. So he was like, why don't you come down to the basement area and then we can, position it in front of this skull we're working on. And so we go our way down there. It's this like cement, basement, and through this hallway into this tiny room with a full-on, really nice condition Styracosaurus skull that was like, it was in the jacket, but it was like finished being prepped. So it wasn't even really a museum display. It was like and you could see the little horns on the sides and the horn poking up, and
wow.
And just to like even be in that with him, and that's the whole experience was just like, oh.
Yeah.
But we started up this interview, and it was to the point where I was in the room with him, but the room was so tiny that it was me and the cameras, and then
The cameras were in the doorway, and I'm outside the room
yeah, he wasn't in the room at all.
monitoring the cameras.
So it was a little cramped. We started going through it, and we were having a really good time. And I think when you have a really good time, you just want to keep talking about stuff. So we're talking about this, and he's telling this story about like how he found these some Albertosaur fossils, I think. And this was like hour into the interview or so, maybe hour and 15, and I'm standing like this, and I'm like, this is a cool story. And then just like out of nowhere, I start getting tunnel vision.
Oh, no.
And
no.
I'm just like, uh-oh. And then I like began to faint. So I'm falling over the side of of like a drawer in the back, and
You just sort of slumped over.
slumped
And
over back into that.
And I was watching the monitor. I can't even see James. I just see Curry's face go, oh, are you okay? And then James comes to, and he's a little bit out of it.
Yeah.
And
So we ended up switching places, and I was there and sort of still asking questions, but I was just in a chair taking a little break, listening to the interesting story.
to me, that was the most memorable. And I hope
That was a lot
I
of
don't want that to embarrass James, but
No,
it's just the
I mean,
funniest darn
yeah.
story.
It's just, and I mean, it was nice too because everyone was pretty nice about it, and we all,
Yeah.
sort of continued the shoot.
And Curry will always remember you. Oh, you're the kid that fainted in the interview.
Well, I'm
You're
glad
starstruck.
yeah. I'm glad it wasn't anything serious.
No fossils were harmed
No.
in the making of this production.
That's funny. That's your priority.
No dinosaurs or humans
Yeah.
were harmed.
Yeah. Priority number 1, other people. Priority number 2, dinosaurs. Priority number 3, me.
We also, later that day, one of the cameras fell over
Oh, yeah.
and broke. So
Oh, no.
luckily that
It
was
was at the
after,
end.
but that was like almost as bad to me as like my kid falling over and hitting his head was like, my cameras.
Yeah, you know what? Sorry. Priority number 3, cameras. Priority number 4, me.
No, you were priority number 3 for
Okay.
sure.
Good to know I'm number 3.
On Curry's list, well, you're number 1 on mine.
How many people have you interviewed so far?
Like 46 or
Yeah.
something.
Oh,
We're
wow.
at 46.
Yeah.
Probably too many.
Yeah, we're trying to sort of have this last week or so be like the end for the most part, and then
Yeah.
I think if we get to 50, that's like the number of numbers where it's like, okay, we are officially ultra done.
Yeah, I mean, considering you got to boil it down to 90 minutes, that's
Yeah.
an
Right.
average of not even 2 minutes a
Yeah,
person.
it's a little under a minute and a half.
Some may go a little longer, some may go a little shorter, but these doors just keep opening. That's the crazy thing. And, our ultimate goal, just for fun, would be to have, some celebrity like who was involved with Jurassic Park. We've interviewed, Dean Cundy, the guy who filmed Jurassic Park, Phil Tippett, the dinosaur supervisor, and we keep getting sort of closer and closer to Spielberg or Pratt or any of
road.
these, Goldblum and,
Yeah.
and Laura Dern. Like, if one of those people, even a minor character were to say, yeah, I'll be in your little dinosaur movie, it would just be like, heaven to us. So,
Yeah.
if anybody has any connection,
Yeah, if anyone knows an extra.
let us know. We're getting closer and closer, but that's kind of like the finishing touch. And then, it's taking this is kind of the pie in the sky version and trying to whittle that down to be, just a really interesting 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Rather than a long 25 hours or 4 hours.
Yeah, you could do those series, really, but I mean, he's leaving for college in a week, so his time's going to get limited. I hear Cats in the Cradle, in my head all the time, and so it's like it's now or never. This thing needs to get out there, and like I said before, we really like the idea of it being, just a movie, I've always wanted to be in the movie industry. I kind of danced around as an extra, and I do video production, but it's not, I don't make movies, I make videos. And so for me, it's something special to be able to do it with my son. I love documentary, and, it's hard how are you going to get that much of somebody's time, some subject matter expert or somebody worth documenting? Well, I'm his dad. I could kind of just make him do it.
Yeah, you can kind of just make him do whatever you want.
And these interviews, like, they keep coming because in a way it's like, I don't want them to end,
Yeah.
And it's coming to an end really fast. And that's hard.
Yeah. Can you give us a little taste of the story you're working on, or are you keeping that under wraps?
I mean, I think to a degree we can at least, there's sort of topics and things that we want to have, it be a part of. So without going into it a whole lot, it's sort of,
It's
there's...
about these podcasters, they're husband and wife.
Yeah, we open on two podcasters in the greatest podcast.
That's the first 70 minutes.
That makes sense,
and then there's sort of this montage of James fainting and meeting some celebrity paleontologist.
A picture of Jeff Goldblum.
Yeah,
right.
Us talking
His
to
star,
a cardboard
Hollywood
cutout.
star, and credits. That's it. No, go ahead. Give him the true synopsis.
In the broadest of scopes, we really want to go through sort of the opening idea of like, okay, well, here's me. I'm sort of an example of just one of these people. There are so many who are like interested in dinosaurs, like committally almost. It's been a really long time, and you can see it doing it for a very long time afterwards. And the question is just like, okay, well, why is it that I even find this interesting? Why does anyone find this interesting? And then beyond that, like, even in a sense, there's one thing to sort of be on the sidelines and be invested, but like, why do people devote their lives to this sort of thing? And really the interesting part that doesn't have quite as clean of an answer, beyond just sort of history, is that dinosaurs, compared to every other branch or era of prehistoric life, have just this like weird sort of celebrity status. Like, we've been talking about it with so many people. If you want to do something about Earth history, try and find a way to cram in the word dinosaur. You'll get more interest. Like, it's just inevitable, doing something about therapsids and mammalian reptiles and stuff. The creatures before the dinosaurs. Like, just, trying to do marine reptiles swimming with the dinosaurs. Just however you can. And so at that point, it's like this other question of trying to interview. We've interviewed some dinosaur experts, but we've also interviewed some people who their specialties are in other things. And yet, in paleo, they keep having to sort of come back to dinosaurs as this magnet for appeal. So to get into why that is and why it's been that way over the last 150 years or so is really what a lot of the beginning of it is about. So there's sort of this exploration of like really early paleontology, kind of the classic stuff from England and from the beginnings of in America and then all over the world, really, as people start going more places. And leading into that, there's all these sort of pop culture versions of dinosaurs over the years. We've been cataloging, King Kong and even just paintings and stuff, but all these old movies Harryhausen made. And as you're leading up, you're getting through this point where there's like slumps and reignition and interest in dinosaurs. And eventually, through the 70s, I'm assuming you guys are familiar with the dinosaur renaissance sort of era. And then as you get to the 70s, 80s, like research is ramping up. And then there's just this culmination with Jurassic Park. And we've really found that that's almost this like divider in the timeline of like, pre-JP, yeah, and then JP. Before Jurassic Park era and Jurassic Park era. Because without fail, really, when we've talked about sort of, why do you think dinosaurs are popular with the people? It's like, well, now it's because they were in, one of the highest grossing movie franchises of all time.
Yep.
And beyond that, there's just, this explosion of just like cultural relevance. So we go through a little bit of just like the Jurassic Park. It's almost like a mini Jurassic Park fan film, getting to talk to some of these people. Even though, ironically, Jurassic Park like wasn't why I got into dinosaurs. I like it as a movie, and I watched it I think when I was like 12 or so. But I mean, a lot of it, of what sold it for me was books and documentaries and stuff that came out sort of in my time, being a 2000s kid. But just to see sort of, it's like one of the biggest cultural milestones in like all of paleontology, really. So seeing the transformation that happens in how people perceive dinosaurs and how people perceive paleontologists, like before and after that movie is crazy. So beyond that, there's some talk about sort of all the different types of dinosaur enthusiasts who get into it in different ways. You got artists, you have scientists, you have collectors, of even just like toys and stuff like that.
Tattoos, you have World's Strongest Man, with like T-Rex tattoos. And that's like his whole image. Oh yeah, I'll have to send you.
There's a lot of interesting things.
Yeah.
And even just these little stories too of amateurs and just like people who are really into dinosaurs going out and finding something and making a scientific difference. There's a couple examples that we have of people we've met, and they tell us, these stories about like, well, I just sort of wanted to be a part of it, and I thought it was cool, so I started walking around my ranch or whatever it is, and I found a dinosaur, and now there's a new dinosaur, that's been introduced
and it's
to the world.
Named after me.
And it's named after me.
Yeah.
That's the dream.
So that's all the spoilers you're going to get.
Yeah.
I'm putting the kibosh right there.
We appreciate that.
I've had this sort of healthy paranoia from the beginning because there was just so much synchronicity and everybody, at least in the dinosaur community, is so excited about it that I was like, how come nobody's done this version before? And the worst thing ever would be somebody, beating us to the finish line. But thankfully, we're a few months out. I think we're finally, close enough. But, you see something like Prehistoric Road Trip and Dino Hunters, and you're just like, whoa, wait, they said dinosaurs. And people are like,
their series,
they
though,
have,
is different.
Different, yeah. It's different, yeah. And we are trying to do something, a little unique. It's more about the people who love dinosaurs, because they really are a special group.
Definitely. Yeah. So do you have a release date yet?
I've got a hard date of end of this year, so December 31st, 2020.
Holiday movie.
Yeah.
We don't know what that means in terms of distribution or anything, because I mean, our dream was to, premiere it at like the Natural History Museum or at the Tar Pits in one of their theaters. We wanted to do a film festival, but those are so bizarre now and kind of
Right.
virtual. And so
Yeah.
right now we're focused on, let's just make a good movie.
And then try and cram it onto a streaming service.
Yeah, hey.
We don't have a plan for it, but that would be something we really want to do is, get it so further so that there's an easy way for people to look at it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to inspire people, especially young people. And we're hoping that the breadth of people that we've interviewed, makes it more approachable for everybody. It's not just older white male paleontologists. It kind of started that way, and we got good feedback from the community, and we just learned there's people from all walks of life that are interested in dinosaurs in some way, shape, or form.
And even just get into sort of newer faces, because a lot of what we had been thinking about and what I, think about is just sort of these people who are now like paleo celebrities, but they've just been in it for a really long time, 30, 40 years or something. It's like, that is a lot of what that legacy is going to be, for the future. But there's all these people who haven't really made their legacy yet. And so getting to see just like that sort of raw, hungry student energy of like, I'm going to do it. And I, sort of found my way into it. And like to see sort of these people, it's like, this is going to be the next generation of like the legendary paleontologists.
Yeah.
Just getting to meet all the people has been really quite the experience in itself,
Yeah.
Beyond filming, you just, having the chance to be, hey, and talk for a bit and just nerd out for a bit,
So you've been really active on social media and getting the word out about your show with trailers and everything. Where's the best place for people to go to keep up with what you guys are up to and see when the movie comes out?
whydinosaurs.com is the best place to start. You can see the trailers, you can learn about the project, see who's in the film. You can link off to social media if you want to follow it like that.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thanks for having us. It's just a pleasure, and
really.
to see you is, even cooler. So,
We'll meet someday in person.
yeah.
We'll figure that out.